Hey guys, I hope y'all are having a great week. I hope that um, y'all are staying safe and staying healthy. I miss you guys, and for those of you who I haven't properly met, I wish that we can soon do that. And we are working on some events and some just ways that we can get involved and ways that we can see each other again now that Texas is starting to open back up. And so be looking forward to that, be listening for that as we move forward. Um, anyways, so today we are having our third session in our series Forever Changed. And so for the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about Paul, who was Saul, and we were talking about how his life was forever changed when he met Jesus on the road to Damascus. And since then, he has changed his entire life and the way that he does things so that Jesus can be made known. And so the title for this week's message is Common Ground for Jesus. And so the bottom line is if we are humble and we are flexible, then we can find common ground with anybody, and then we can share the gospel or the good news, and we can tell people about Jesus even better. And so the main question that I want you to be thinking about this week, and as we're going through this series, is am I doing all that I can to help as many people I can know Jesus? I'm going to say it again. Am I doing all that I can to help as many people as I can know Jesus? And so today we struggle with both the pull to fit in with others as well as the pressure to stand out and to be unique. On one hand, in school and in just when we go outside and we hang out with our friends and stuff like that, we want to have things in common with others so that we feel like we belong, we feel like we're a part of a group, and that we have some connection to these people, and then therefore we can hang out with them and have fun with them. But on the same time, we also want to be special. We want to be individuals who aren't just copies and pastes of everyone around us. We want to be unique. And so, but it's in the midst of that tension, in the midst of trying to figure this out, that we are challenged to go and to help people know in Jesus. And so, the last couple of weeks in our series, we've been talking, like I've said, about Paul, who was Saul, and how his life was changed forever by Jesus. And so today, we're going to start where he begins planting churches, where he begins sharing the gospel, sharing the good news that he has come to find in his new life of following Jesus. And so we're going to look at something that he shares with these people at the church that he had just started. And it'll help us, I think, with this struggle to fit in with the popular crowd and fit in with your friends, but also to be unique and say, I'm not just a copy of my friends. Right. So the main passages that we're going to be looking at today are Acts chapter 18, verses 7 through 8, and 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 19 through 23. All right. So Acts chapter 18, 7 through 8 says, So he left there and went to the house of a man named Titus Justus, a worshiper of God, whose house was next door to the synagogue. Crispus, the name of the leader of the synagogue, believed in the Lord, and along with his whole household. And many of the Corinthians, when they heard, believed and were baptized. And so in these two short verses, we read about the start of a church in the city of Corinth. And so Corinth is going to be a really important city to Paul, and it's mentioned throughout the Bible, especially in Paul's writings. And Paul writes to letters that are recorded in the New Testament to the Corinthian church, to the people of Corinth. And it's also important in history. A lot of important stuff just happens in Corinth. And so this is an important city. This is an important church that Paul is starting. And so in these verses, we see the beginnings of this church, and we see that Paul wrote to these believers and to share his example of how they can reach people for the gospel, and it also helps us and challenges us today on how we can fit in and yet be unique. And so we're going to look at what Paul says to the Corinthian church in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And we're going to pick up in verse 19, and it says, "Even though I am a free man with no master, I have become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. When I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. When I was with those who follow the Jewish law, I too lived under the law. Even though I'm not subject to the law, I did this so that I could bring Christ to those who are under the law. When I am with the Gentiles, or those who do not believe in Jewish law, I too live apart from that law so that I can bring them to Christ. But I do not ignore the law of God, I obey the law of Christ. When I'm with those who are weak, I share in their weaknesses, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, and some translations say, I have become all things to all people, doing everything I can to save some, or so that some may be saved. I do everything to the spread of the good news or the gospel, and to share in its blessings, to share in its love, to share in its wealth, to share in Jesus. That's what Paul is saying, that I'm doing everything that I can, everything in my power to share the love of Christ. And I know this might sound a little crazy and confusing, so let's break it down. So Paul is the same guy with the great, remember, he had a great upbringing, he had the best education money could buy, and he was super bold when he came to preaching about Jesus. And he was also saying here that he was willing to become a slave to serve others so that people can just get to know Jesus. So Paul is a Roman citizen, but he's also a Jew. And so because he's a Roman citizen, and now remember, Rome is in control of this area at the time. And so because he's a Roman citizen, he doesn't have to, or he isn't subject to the same rules that Jewish people are. So he can go and he can go to the stores and he can go and do whatever he wants because he's a Roman citizen and not have to pay attention to some of the restrictions that Jews do. But when he's saying that I'm going to be a slave so that people can know about Jesus, or when I was with the Jews, I followed the Jewish law, meaning I did everything that they did. I was like them so that way Jesus could be known. And when he was with the Gentiles or the Romans or the Greeks who didn't follow Jewish law, well, he did what they did. Now, we don't know exactly if he did all of the bad things that they did, but he didn't live by things like the dietary restrictions. You know, if you were a Jewish person, you couldn't eat pork. Well, the Greeks and the Romans loved pork. And so that's one of the things where when he was with the Jews, he didn't eat these things or do these things because it would have been offensive. And when he was with the Greeks and the Romans, had he have not eaten them when he was with them, it would have been offensive. And so that's what he's saying. He did all things for all people and to be a slave to all people so that way people can know about Jesus. Does that make any sense? I hope it does. So he became a slave, or he was willing to become a slave in order to help as many people find Jesus. Which brings us to our first point. Motivation matters. Paul's goal wasn't to start the biggest church, wasn't to have the most followers, or to be the next big hotspot preacher that everybody listens to on podcasts and stuff like that. No, that's not what Paul was trying to do. He also wasn't trying to just fit in. Actually, if anything, he was standing out because nobody was talking about Jesus like he was, because they were afraid that the Romans were going to kill him. Because at this point, the Romans had already killed Jesus. And so, if anything, Paul should have been trying to fit in so he didn't get killed, but instead he was out there and he was preaching boldly. But then again, he wasn't just trying to draw attention to himself. Though he was countercultural and though he was speaking boldly, he wasn't speaking boldly and telling people, oh, look at me, I don't fear the Romans. No, he was saying, hey, look at me, I'm a follower of Jesus. Hey, Jesus is what I really want you to pay attention to. His motivation for everything that he was doing and everything that he was trying to do was so that he could help as many people get to Jesus, help as many people as he could to follow and to know Jesus. And so I want to ask you, what is motivating you? Is your love for Jesus, is your love for the gospel motivating you? Or are you just trying to make yourself look better? Are you just trying to gain something by saying, oh yeah, I told people about Jesus today, pat on the back? And then are you motivated by wanting to help others know and follow Jesus? Or again, are you motivated by wanting others to know and follow you? Are you trying to be the leader in that popular group at school? Are you just trying to build your name up as a good person, or are you trying to build Jesus's name up? And then the second point is do what you don't have to spread the good news of Jesus. So Paul is a follower of Jesus, and he used to be a Jew. He shared that when he was with the Jews, he lived like them, which meant he followed the rules and practiced things that he didn't have to. And so that he could help those who were Jews to follow Jesus. And when he was with the Gentiles, anybody who wasn't a Jew, he didn't practice those Jewish traditions or obey the Jewish laws because he was so focused on helping non-Jewish people know and follow Jesus. Now, we're not sure about what weakness Paul was talking about when he said that he took on their weaknesses. But we do know that he shared whatever hardship that they were going through so that he could help people get to Jesus, even in the midst of that hardship. So he was there and he says, you know what? Y'all are struggling with money. I'm going to struggle with money. You know what? Y'all need food. I need food. That's what Paul was saying. He was seeing their hardship. And instead of letting them just be there and say, oh, look at me, I have money, I have education, I'm a Jew. No, he got there and he was like, you know what? I'm going to struggle with you because I have Jesus and I want you to see Jesus. So again, none of these things Paul had to do. And so we can get so caught up in, so well, we have to do this or we don't have to do this. And you might even hear people say that, oh, well, I have a right to be here. I have a right to do this, or you can't make me. Well, those are the wrong attitudes. And those attitudes have no place when we are trying to get people to see Jesus, trying to teach people to follow Jesus. So if our motivation is similar to Paul's in that we want to help as many people as possible to know and to follow Jesus, then we're going to do things that we don't have to in order to accomplish that goal. And so what that looks like practically is, let's say when school opens back up, right? And you are sitting in the lunchroom and you and your friends are having a conversation and y'all are talking and laughing at one table, right? But you see this one kid all by themselves and you don't have to go over there. You can continue in talking with your people, with your friends and having fun. Or you can do what you don't have to do. And you can go and you can sit with them and you can be their friend when nobody else is. Again, you don't have to do that. But if your motivation is to get people to know Jesus, then you're going to want to do that. So if our motivation is that we want to help as many people as possible know and follow Jesus, then we will do things we don't have to in order to accomplish that goal. So our last point is that we need to search for common ground to share Jesus. Search for a stepping point. Search for something that you have in connection with him. And so Paul says, I try to find common ground, or I become all things for all people. And sometimes we don't realize that we have these things in common with people because we just don't talk to them. And so we have to have conversations and really get to know these people to see what connects us. And sometimes it's hard because common factors aren't always obvious. You know, you and your friends have obvious things that you have in common. You like the same video games, you like the same foods, you like the same sports or the same subjects in school, right? Well, what about that kid who's sitting up by himself? Well, you think he's weird because you don't know what he likes. And so you just have to have a conversation with him and discover what you truly have in common. If anything, you have something in common, and that's you and him, or you and her are both children of God. Both of you are created by Jesus, and both of you are loved. And so that's a connection point right there. And so if our goal is to truly help them, then we're going to want to, and then we're going to try to find things in common so that we can share Jesus. And imagine what this could look like if we practice these 3 Paul principles, meaning our motivation is to make Jesus known. We are trying to so we're trying to make Jesus known. That's our motivation, right? We're trying to do what we don't have to in order to spread Jesus. And then the third thing is we're trying to connect things. And so if we did these things, imagine how many more people would at least have heard about Jesus because you were telling them about them. What would be different in your day-to-day life if you started focusing on Jesus and making sure that your motivation in making friends is ultimately not about you, but helping people know and follow Jesus and know that you follow him? And then what needs to change in our attitudes and actions, and so that you can do things that you don't have to do, that you can share the gospel in places that you typically wouldn't because you're doing something different than you typically do because you're trying to share Jesus. And then that might mean that you have to give up certain rights that you think that you have, certain comforts that you think that you need, and doing things that you haven't done in a while so that you can build common ground. Go sit with that person by themselves. Go talk with them, right? Go pick up the papers of that they've dropped in the hallway. Go talk with people you don't normally talk with. Say hello to somebody at church. Say hello to somebody in school. Doing those things that you don't have to do go a long way in showing Jesus. And so are you willing to be like Paul so that you can share Jesus? This wasn't imaginary concepts that Paul just wrote about. No, Paul lived this day in and day out. And so what if it was our reality? What if we day in and day out checked our motivation, checked that it was for Jesus, checked that we were doing things that we didn't have to do, not that we were hurting ourselves, not that we were, just completely forsaking everything that we have, but instead, maybe spend extra time with this person, go talk to this person, hold a door open for somebody, doing things that you don't have to do. And so I want you to think about this again, the main question. Am I doing all that I can to help as many people I can know Jesus? That's my challenge for you, is to wrestle with that question and to decide that if you're not doing everything that you can, why aren't you? And how can your motivation be for Jesus? And how can you do things for Jesus, to share Jesus with others? And so that was session 3 of Forever Changed. I hope that you enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to our next session. So tune in.